I'd like to preface this by saying that not all mental health professionals are bad people. Good doctors and medication have saved my life. I also didn't grow up in the US, so if you see something in this story that makes you go, that's not how it works. Keep in mind that other countries might have different laws. And furthermore, this describes my experiences with staying at a mental hospital, so prepare for triggers. Alright, here we go. I was a troubled kid. I'm kind of a troubled person in general. But when I was in my early teens, specifically in this story I was 14, I was doing some bad stuff and refusing to go to school. So I was put on a waiting list for a children's mental hospital. I know now that the fact that I was on that waiting list for close to half a year should have been the first warning sign. At the time, I enjoyed being on sick leave from school, which basically meant I got to play The Sims until 6 in the morning for 5 months straight. But when I had to pack my stuff to actually go to the hospital, I of course didn't really want to go. I wanted to get help, don't get me wrong, but the idea of being away from home for 6 weeks, which is the standard time they take to analyze and watch you to give you a diagnosis, after which you can choose to pursue treatment, it scared me. I arrived at the hospital in tears, my mom carrying my suitcase for me. The nurses noticed that obviously I didn't want to stay. "Are you here on your own free will?" the doctor asked me. I shook my head. They just shrugged it off, saying they could get a judicial decision forcing me to stay there. I never go to talk to a judge. I never got to defend or explain myself. And as far as I know, my parents didn't talk to a judge either. A judge glossed over my medical history and then signed a piece of paper that forced me to stay in this place for 6 weeks. The contents of my suitcase were searched, and I remember feeling like I had just arrived in prison. The first terrifying thing happened to me on my first night. I had scratched open some of my old scabs, and when I went to the nurse to ask for a bandage, everyone went nuts. In their eyes, I had purposely harmed myself, which they couldn't prove, but okay. So what do you do when a 14-year-old mental patient does this? You talk to her, you try to help. No, you take away all her jewelry, a necklace from my mom and a bracelet from my ex-girlfriend, who at the time I still had very strong feelings for her, and send her off to the timeout room for 24 hours. The timeout room was a small room with a big window that could just barely fit a bed. If I'd use the bathroom, I'd ask a nurse to accompany me. And no joke, at one point I was in the bathroom, with a nurse standing guard in front of the door. She asked if I was doing okay, and I sarcastically responded with, "No." She goes, "Really?" and she ripped the door open. All of my clothes were taken from my room and kept in the front office for the time I stayed in the timeout room. So whenever I needed them, I had to go up to the front office to ask for them. But apart from having to ask for clothing and the bathroom trips, I was completely left alone in that room. No one ever came to check up on me. Getting out of the timeout room wasn't a lot better. For the first week or two, I had bad stomach problems. I would get up multiple times a night to use the bathroom, which, by the way, you didn't have one of in your room. You had to walk down the hall to use it. And because my stomach kept me up all night, I would often not get enough sleep and end up sleeping through the day, which led to me not partaking in group activities. And instead of, waking me up, I was yelled at, and I quote, if I was up all night roaming the halls, I would be tired too. And because I didn't partake in group activities, I couldn't earn outside time. Yes, I had to earn going outside. Even just sitting on the front steps with a nurse right next to me had to be earned. So, for the first 6 weeks, I was effectively locked up, except for school and weekends where I was allowed to go home. It was blatantly obvious that none of the nurses really cared about any of the patients. They weren't even real nurses. They were more like prison guards. One of them straight up looked like they were homeless. Another one sounded like she had been a 5 packs a day smoker her life and all. And I mean all of them were chain smokers. Every free second they had, they would use it for smoke breaks. Right outside of the door too, with the doors open. So that all the other kids who were currently going through nicotine withdrawals could smell the cigarette smoke. Within 6 weeks of staying at the mental hospital, I saw a psychiatrist at whooping 2 times. once for a general introduction and once for an IQ test. Anyone who's ever struggled with mental illness probably knows this sentence like, just pull yourself together or get over it. They're the least helpful things one could say to a mentally ill person. I've never heard it that much in my entire life. There was one instance where another patient, who was deathly afraid of spiders, came running out of her room in a borderline panic attack because she had woken up to a spider directly in front of her face. And you know what they told her? Don't be such a baby, it's just a spider. They gave her a broom for her to get rid of the spider herself, which obviously she couldn't do. My roommate and I ended up helping her out. Both of us were scared as well, mind you. But possibly the most outrageous thing happened on my second to last day. Someone had told the guards that I had tried to smuggle in something. So they pulled me out of breakfast and searched my room top to bottom. They didn't find anything, but they found one laying on the floor in the hallway, and it was even still in its wrapper. I wasn't the only patient that did this. As a matter of fact, I don't think there was a single patient who didn't do it. The blade could have belonged to anyone. They had no proof that it was mine. But of course, it was deemed that it was mine. And despite me not having any new cuts on my arm, I was thrown into the timeout room for another 24 hours. Literally my last 24 hours. And they paid so little attention to the timeout room that a fellow inmate was able to slip a letter inside the door so I could take out my frustrations. In case any of you were wondering where my parents were in all of this, my mother wanted to get me out of that place as soon as she had heard about the timeout room. But since my parents had joint custody, she needed my father to agree to it. And my father deserves a story like this for himself, but to make it short, he hadn't talked to me in over 4 years but was somehow convinced that I needed help and refused to get me out of there. My final diagnosis from that place: narcissistic neurosis. I was 14 and to this day, I had no idea how they came up with any kind of diagnosis, considering I had seen an actual doctor a total of 2 times. Additionally, this result was delivered to us, my parents and I, by the head doctor of the hospital, who I had never seen in my life, during a conclusive meeting on my last day. I was offered to stay and start behavioral therapy, but I guess it goes without saying that I politely declined that offer. Every therapist and psychiatrist I have talked to since, and trust me, there's been a few over the last 7 years, have disregarded the diagnosis entirely. Some have even laughed at it. I'm currently diagnosed with bipolar disorder, depression, and a panic disorder, and my current psychiatrist has suggested that I might suffer from borderline personality disorder. I guess the moral of the story is to always do research on the hospital you plan on getting yourself admitted to. I'm sure as heck that I hope I never have to see any of those guards, nurses, or doctors ever again. To give a little background, I'm a film student in college right now, and me and my buddies are always trying to find new locations to film our movies at. I make horror films, so all the places I'm looking for and exploring are abandoned. And tonight, me and my group of friends, there were 10 of us in total, decided to check out this abandoned hospital down the street from our school. They had been there before and said it was a great spot for filming and that I should check it out. So tonight was that night. So when we get there, I have my Nikon DSLR out with a handheld LED light attached to the top of the camera to scout the place when we get inside. I didn't film any of the encounter because I usually only film the inside of these places, but I had my camera on light out to shine the way through. I was leading the way down this narrow path that led to these walls that we had to climb to get on the roof of the place, where we would access one of the rooms to get inside the building. Because I was carrying my camera and bag, I was trying to look for another way up. So I walk a little further down this narrow path and I start noticing a lot of clothes and random shoes in cardboard boxes lying around the area. There was even an empty sleeping bag. And that's when I knew that we probably weren't alone, and we were likely going to run into someone if we made the wrong move. And boy, did we ever. One of my friends walking behind me down this path notices a door to my right. It's closed, and my guess was that it was locked and not worth trying. But he already has his hand on the floor handle and starts tugging. I look over, and it barely cracks open, but something is holding it from the inside. I shine my LED on the inside and I see a shirt tied to the inside door handle to another part of the room, acting as a lock. But my friend, being the way that he is, tugs again and rips that shirt right off and the door swings open. Inside, there is someone sleeping on like a table or a couch, alongside with a group of terrifying looking people sitting by a light inside that room, and they all stop and stare at us. In the short glimpse that I got, my friend yells, "Oh crap, get the heck out of here," and he slams the door and just bolts past me. I was standing there, a little shaken, almost feeling like I should apologize, but I just follow him instead. My 8 other friends are already on the roof at this point, asking what's going on, and we just run for our lives out of the area. I heard the door in the path swing open, but I couldn't look back. From there, me and my friend rendezvous back to a higher part of the area, away from any entrance leading to the hospital. There is a small gap that you could jump across to get to one of the roofs of the building that my other friends were on. About 4 of them follow us and jump across, ready to get out of there, but the others stay on the roof and watch us, stuck like statues. I look at them confused at what they're staring at, and I begin to hear this metal dragging on the concrete. I turn around and there is a crazy looking man, maybe mid-20s, dragging a baseball bat with nails all along the end, walking towards us as he drags the bat along the concrete, acting just like Negan from The Walking Dead. My heart sinks. At this point, I turn off my light and all that's shining is the moonlight. I keep my hand on my pocket knife, desperately trying to think of anything to do if he starts swinging, but I know there is no way I would come out alive if I tried anything. Plus, I gotta take care of my camera. So he walks closer to us and the first thing he says is, "You're gonna want to keep that light off," and everyone is silent. I'm practically shaking. He then starts circling around us as he says, "You guys are never gonna come back here, right?" He walks past me and sees the camera and raises his bat saying, "And you're gonna put the camera away?" And I just barely say, "Yeah, it's off." He looks over to my friends watching on the roof past the gap and he points to them, and he says, "Jump." And they stand silent. The guy says again, "Jump across right now, just run and jump, you'll make it." Keep in mind, the gap doesn't look that bad, but the drop is fatal if you don't make the jump. And my 4 friends are all staring down at the drop, fearing what could happen. One of them says, "I don't think that I can make it." And the Negan guy replies, "Run and jump, or else you're gonna regret it." So my friend steps back, runs, and barely makes the jump. From there, one by one, the other 3 make the jump across, all while the Negan guy is standing right behind us with his bat, dragging it along the concrete. Once we all got across, he says to us, "You're never gonna come back here again, you understand?" And we awkwardly apologized and run away back to our cars in the distance. I get in my car and look back at the area, and he's still standing there, watching us with his bat as we speed off. Realistically, we probably could have taken him as a group if anything bad happened, but who knows who else was back there. Sadly, the hospital is a no-go from here on out, but I'll still be looking around for some sick filming locations. What scared me the most about this guy was how fearless and disturbed the guy looked. He had definitely seen some stuff and had undoubtedly used that bat before on someone else. He looked like a killer. He was a killer, and it was his calmness that really got to me. Definitely a lesson learned, but regardless, I'm never going back there. This happened about 7.5 years ago when I was 13. My grandmother was in the hospital with pneumonia. By the time my family got there, there was about 11 to 15 of us. Yeah, it's a lot, but 5 of the 8 children were there with their families. After a little while, they told that we needed to leave so they could give her some shots. At the time, we didn't know there was a waiting room on the floor, so my uncle suggested we go down to the first floor so that we could sit in the ER waiting room. We had to go down on 2 separate elevators since there were so many of us. Once we got down, there we saw 2 nurses hiding behind a door. When we asked what's wrong, they said nothing, you can still go in there. We walked in. It was about 2 p.m. on a Sunday. There was no one in there and the lights were off. Yes, in retrospect, we should have just turned around and walked back. But like all people in horror movies, we didn't think anything of it. We met up with the rest of the family, and that's when we noticed two other guys. The first man was sitting with his hands behind his back. The second one was standing behind him holding his wrists together. The man sitting was staring daggers right at me. After about 10 minutes of sitting and staring, a third man in a hospital security uniform came up and asked if we saw anything. Visibly confused, we said no and they told us that we needed to leave. We went back up to the 4th floor and found the waiting room. It was right next to the psych ward with a sign that said, "Stay clear. There's a high chance of flight risk." Now you might be thinking what's so scary about that story. A random guy was staring at a 13-year-old girl. Well, a little while later we found out what had happened. The man sitting with his hands restrained was a junkie looking for a quick fix. He had walked in and was told that he couldn't get any drugs without a medical reason. So he pulled out a knife and stabbed the woman at the reception in the neck. Why we were allowed in the room with this man while the hospital was supposedly in lockdown, I have no clue. I also have no clue where the police were during this whole situation. This story does have a kind of happy ending, for the woman at least. About 2 years ago, this incident was brought up at a family gathering. My cousin said that the woman did survive. She no longer works for the hospital and has a lot of difficulties resulting from her injury, but she was working as a secretary for a school. This literally happened today. I advise you to skip this story if you're too sensible to gross stuff or if you're eating right now. So I'm a man, and yesterday was my birthday. I just turned 24, which means I've spent the weekend drinking my butt off. Friday at a club, Saturday at a bar, and yesterday at a friend's house. So you can imagine the mess I was this particular Monday morning. I have to take 2 buses to get to work, and the whole stopping all the time thing that they do can make me sick even in a non-hangover day. I considered going by car to avoid this, but then thought, screw it. I've been here before. I could as well save the gas money and suck it up this sickness for the hour that I spend riding the buses. A big mistake. I got on the bus and immediately felt sicker, but again, not my first time, and decided to focus my attention on the other bus riders to get my mind off the bad feeling. Bigger mistake. At first, I didn't notice anything weird about this man, about 50 to 60, but then he suddenly got up and changed seats for no particular reason, and I could tell that he was probably homeless because his clothes were very dirty. Okay, no big deal, nothing wrong with that. But then he starts rubbing his fingers against the bus floor and licking them. He smiled as he did this, and I noticed that he had a few to almost no teeth. The scene combined with my hangover made me extremely unwell. I thought it couldn't get worse, but he got up again and started picking whatever pieces of dirt and garbage were on the floor and eating them. He then got to the back of the bus and started maniacally laughing, which honestly creeped me out. I then decided to close my eyes to avoid seeing whatever he was doing next, but I had to open my eyes occasionally so I didn't miss my stop. And when I saw the spot before mine, I got up, and so did he. As expected, he didn't smell the best, and I defied my urge to vomit with him standing next to me. I avoided looking at him, and when the bus finally stopped and the doors opened, he went to the bus's garbage and did the same thing. I couldn't contain myself any longer, and as I stepped out of the bus, I upchucked. I didn't go full blast toys, so it was just a little bit, and the rest, as you can imagine, I swallowed. I then looked up at him and he was smiling. As I stepped out of the bus, the man got down on the bus floor and started to do the same thing. He was rubbing his hands again at it and getting all in it, and still smiling. I watched for what must have been the longest second of my life. My stop is located in front of a mall in which I got in running as fast as I could, and proceeded to head straight to the bathroom. I know that man was probably ill in some way, but I do feel sorry for him, and expect that somebody got him the help that he needs after seeing what he did today. But I don't want to ever see anybody even resembling him again in my life. It's like he appeared precisely in the day in which I was less able to deal with this kind of stuff, and the image of him doing what he did on the bus floor is forever stuck in my mind.